to our podcast.
What is up, folks? My guest today is Massimo di Costanzo, and he's the owner of Di Costanzo Wines. And Massimo and I actually have a history that goes way back. We've been what I'm going to call acquaintances for a while. He used to come in as a customer to this butcher shop that I used to work at in Napa, and this is a testament to how small of a world this industry is. His wine that he makes now was served to us during the meal that I had during this place called French Laundry video. And so Massimo had that video recommended to him on YouTube, and he watched it, and then he reached out on Instagram. Fascinating. So I obviously wanted to, one, catch up with him, and two, we're kind of using this episode not to just do that, but to get his lessons on winemaking, branching out and finding your own identity, starting your own thing, and so much more. And so if you enjoyed this conversation, I would also recommend you queue up my conversation with John Miller, who also gave a ton of insight into wine and food and how they function in restaurants and tasting menus, especially at like high caliber places. If at any point you would like to check out Di Costanzo Wines, you want to chat to Massimo or ask him or his wife Erin a question, you can check that out in the links in the description, in the show notes of your podcast player, or on the website that you happen to be listening to this episode on. Massimo, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's really good to see you after so long, it seems like.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having us. We're really pleased to be here and reconnect.
So I'm a Wisconsinite at heart. I don't think I told you this way back in the day in Napa. And so cheese, believe it or not, holds a special place in my heart. What do cheese making and wine making have in common? And this is based on some research we were doing on you. If you didn't do winemaking, you might be a cheese maker. Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love the flavors of cheese. The common thread is kind of that microbial world, right? And these flavors that you get from kind of the complexity of microbiology, but also of terroir. And so for me, it is quite similar in that sense. Yeah, maybe with climate change, maybe I'll switch to switch to cheese making, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Particular cheese that you would kind of gravitate towards, or a type of milk that you would I mean that world is kind of, again, like I was in cow's milk land, but then I worked cheese station at French Laundry, so that was my first foray into kind of like nice cheeses that we would get in, and then it's like, oh, we don't use them right away, we actually age them until they're perfect, and then what temperature do you serve them at? There's so many nuances that I just, people make fun of us because we wear foam cheese heads at the top of on our skulls when we go to football games, but like
right.
And wine is the same, right? Like there's like box wine, there's like the cheap stuff, and then there's like taking it as an art form. So I'm curious if you would gravitate towards any type of cheese.
I tend to gravitate towards softer cheeses, kind of that really like, just like, almost like spoon, you can spoon it out,
right.
Kind of cheese. I know like Jasper Hill, like their Windermere or like their Harbison, those are pretty, for like domestic cheese. It's fun to talk about domestic cheese. What's cool about wine and cheese, they come from a place, and I think that is what really draws me to both. And you can taste what the animals are eating and the end result of that. And the same with kind of that terroir of winemaking. So in that sense, they're super similar. Do you have any favorites in particular?
Brillat Savarin is again, to that like soft cheese when that's aged perfectly. It's hard to go wrong with that. I think that would probably be, anytime I see that on a menu, I end up having to like compulsively just order it, regardless of if it's paired with something sweet or not. Epoisse is also one that I just like, as funky as it is, and as just, kind of like off-putting as it can be to certain people. I had to make recipes with that cheese enough times, and I've worked with it long enough where it's almost like there's certain people who, I think if they grow up in a house where probably their father drank kind of like particularly bitter beers, they would probably be more likely to enjoy beers that have more of like a bitter kind of like hop forward kind of flavor palette versus the person who just like they I don't know. I think it's repeat exposure to
Totally.
nice funky like Blue Darverne like I love what cheese can because I think that what gets missed, or at least where I grew up, is like the more cheese, the better. And I think I swung the other way to wanting to go to like, if I have just one bite of this, can you just sit with that and just be in like full expression of that cheese making, cheese maker region, all the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I gravitated towards versus the kind of just like the cheese pull mac and cheese where you just have like a giant bowl of it and that's exactly what you enjoy. So yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, another one of my favorites is it's called Marzolino, and it's a cheese. It's a pecorino that they make in Italy in the spring. Marzo means March, and it's a super fresh pecorino. And so I'm always really whenever I go to like Florence, I'm always searching out the Marzolino cheese because and I try to go in the spring because it's such a that fresh cheese is also really something special about being in the season. There's aged cheeses, but there's always, something special about fresh cheese as well. And just like, it's like fresh bread, right? Like fresh out of the oven. It's kind of, or like that fresh olive oil straight out of the centrifuge. Like those are things that, th- this kind of like the highest kind of expression of those ingredients.
To get a sense of your background, I'm curious if there was a moment in your winemaking experience where you ever took a step back and you're like, damn, I can make really good wine. Like I'm really good at this. Like, is there a moment that comes to mind where you had that thought?
No, not yet.
Still pushing
I
for
th
it.
I think I'm still pushing. I think I tend to have perfectionist tendencies, which has its pros and its cons. So it's kind of like you're always kind of searching and improving. But there is a point in your life when you have to say, okay, you have to find some happiness in it too. So joy, you have to find joy, right, in what you do, and sit back and not be overly critical of what you do, because I'm sure chefs, they, like, do they always enjoy their food, or are they thinking about it too much? So winemakers can fall into that same pattern, and it. I have to remind myself to take a step back and take a deep breath, and but it's nice when people give feedback, and they those are really comforting things and reinforcing.
How
But
do you
I've always tried not to get I don't want to. I'm not an ego guy. I'm not a big
right.
head guy. I just stay humble and also always be a student. I think for me that's a big part of how I approach things. Always be a student. Always learn. Always have a learner's mind. I think for me that is, don't assume that you know everything, because that's when you start making mistakes. And yeah, I don't know. I think being a learner is I don't know. It's more fun. I don't know. And I think you'll make better wine in the long run if you can evolve.
I appreciate you being so honest with that answer because I think that the goal of that question is obviously to dive back into some of your experience. And so, what moments of winemaking maybe made you feel humbled? Like you're taking a look at what you're doing and you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Well, I think in my time at I became the assistant winemaker at Screaming Eagle in 2006, and I was solely production focused. And I think, yeah, and that was like an aha moment. I was like, wow, I'm really in this place. But I realized I wanted to wear more hats. I was like, okay, I'm here. Like you're at this 3-star Michelin, you're at the French Laundry, you're doing this, and that's kind of, I was at this kind of top place. But I realized that I wanted to wear more hats than just production, and kind of create something that was my own. And that was kind of an aha moment for me, where, yeah, there was a shift, and the shift was to go out and, kind of take a big risk and give it a shot. I was 20, I would have been, I started when I was 26, and then I left when I was 28. So basically I started buying my first grapes once I left at 28 years old. And, but that was kind of an aha moment for me, um, in terms of like the shifting of my career, because I wanted to interact with people and not just run a facility, not just run a kitchen. I wanted to do
Yep.
more. So that was a big, one of the big moments in my life for sure.
What was the environment like at Screaming Eagle?
It was a small team. We took over it was with the new owners, so we took over from the previous owners, Gene Phillips, who had sold it, and yeah, it was a small team. It was myself and an assistant and a head winemaker who was more of kind of consulting, and then it was the vineyard crew. So that was kind of like, it was like me and the vineyard crew kind of like lived at the property, and those were really special moments. And talk about good food. Those guys can cook. Yeah, I'm still in touch with those guys today because we bonded over those couple of years. It's kind of a humble place. It's not a grand chateau. It's a ranch. It's a ranch, and that's what I think is what makes it special. That it's just kind of low key, and like, you just roll up and have some carnitas and drink some Screaming Eagle, and
Live the dream.
that's like that's the thing that people don't really get to enjoy. Is like the place. So it's one of those. The first time I ever drove on property, it was like, okay, I get it. I get why this place is special. You have those experiences when you visit certain vineyards, and you're like, I want to make wine from this place. But that's kind of what it was like, and being young and yeah, there was a lot of pressure, but I kind of had the mentality of like, it's just wine. We're just making wine. It's just from this special place, and it's very expensive. And make sure and empty out the pump after every movement, so, because every little drop is worth quite a bit.
You have that aha moment where you say, I want something a little bit more than where I'm at. Why not go get the experience somewhere else where you can wear a couple more hats? Why make the decision to go start your own thing?
Boy, that's a really good question. I did go, so I did not just stop fully working. I was able to buy my first grapes, but in turn, I worked with Philippe Melka Consulting for a couple of vintages. So that would have been '08 and '09. And then after that, to really, because this is all self-funded. So in 2010, so I'd made '08 and '09, and I made that at the Farella Vineyard in Coombsville. And then in 2010, I started sourcing Farella fruit, and that became the first Di Costanzo wine.
Because you
And
guys
then,
didn't put out '08 and '09, right? Like you guys just weren't
no, I
happy
sold
with it.
those off as shiners,
Wow.
just because there wasn't continuity in the vineyard, and I wanted to find a place where, there was a really good relationship with the grower, and they wanted to kind of help, maybe someone on the younger side, and that was the Farella family. They were really very supportive. So for, let's see, about 5 years, I would help them with their wines and make my wine in the same facility. And that really allowed me to get my brand off the ground.
So you're spending that time doing the consulting and seeing the vintages kind of like all come together. Can you lay out for maybe if there's like a young winemaker or a young som or even a chef who's kind of like, this cooking thing's great, but I really want to do wine someday. What are
Yeah.
those skills that you're like observing, developing, identifying that you have a gap in, like when you're spending this time and you're learning all of this stuff? Because clearly, like you're saying, there's a frustration of being just at this place where you want to wear more hats, but then there's where you are now, and I think like I want to fill in some of the gaps for folks of like what you were able to develop during that time.
Well, I think I also wanted to create something that was mine. I think I ended up finding that wine was so personal and I was putting so much of my effort into it. And I don't know if this is like a young person thing or like I was hard to give that up, you know? And I said, because I didn't come from wine, you know, I'm not from a wine family. So this was all kind of new to me. Yeah, you know, you're an artist and you've created this product, and when you put yourself into it, you know, it kind of feels like yours, you know. But then if you know, you have to give that up, you know, if you're working for somebody else. I think my perspective is different now. I think when I was 26 years old, I think I had a different perspective.
We all did.
Yeah, we all did, right, for sure. But what I'd say to a younger person, I mean, what I did, I went to Davis, and then I started working harvest abroad. So I worked in worked in Italy and Argentina and South Africa, and really trying to understand what great wine is or was, because what great wine is it's very subjective, and you know, culturally it's subjective too. So yeah, I would say go get experience in the wine world, you know, and then bring that back, you know, bring that back here. You know, I was like, go work in other chefs' kitchens and then you can find your style.
I had that on my list of questions to ask you because that quote came out as we were just kind of doing some homework on you is the advice to go work a harvest abroad and then come back. What specifically about working abroad stands out to you? Is it the change in the environment? Is it they're using different methods than what we use here domestically, or the age of the vines that you're working with? Like, why not, if you're living in New York, why not go to California to quote unquote get your experience? And then, like, what's special about going abroad in your mind?
I just think it maybe helps to just see how people view wine and see how people live life and see wine, how people interact with wine. I just think it gives you better perspective. I mean, I also, you know, working in Tuscany, I was like, wow, these grapes are a lot less sweet than they are here in California, you know, and tasting these wines, you know, they taste great. Like maybe we don't need to pick as ripe as we do and still make really great wine. So, you know, just as an example. So I think that kind of stuff is important because, you know, if you just come and work in California and you work for the same house, not to say you won't evolve. I think you will evolve. But I think to have those other experiences in your back pocket, you know, kind of, yeah, are important.
You touched on your experience at UC Davis, and the story goes that you planned to study business there, but then you kind of had a change of course at some point in time. You're clearly using both skills now, your wine education and your business education. So looking back, was that a good decision to make that change, or would you have done it differently, or what were some
Sometimes
learnings
yes,
from that?
sometimes no.
Yeah, yeah. So, because so and the follow-up question on that is how did you acquire the business skills you have now? Did you just punt it and say I'm actually going to go full, I'm going to play to my strengths and I'm going to, you know, delegate the business side of things? Where does your head go
I
with
kind
that?
of let the wine guide me because I didn't really know if there was going to be a market for it. So once you know, there was a market for it, you know, I didn't give up my day job either. So until later. But yeah, so I kind of had to learn. I mean, I had some basic business skills, but you know, but like putting together like a cash flow, like I had to, you know, there was a point when I was like, oh, maybe that's important.
Totally.
And maybe that will help. Are we gonna be in the red? Or are we gonna be in the black? And all that kind of stuff. So that came a little later on as we started growing a little bit, and as my wife Erin she came on board because that then it really became important to, you know, if we were both going to be full time for this business, you know, we had to run a tighter ship. Yeah, the creative winemaking part, but then yeah, there is the business end, and just like I'm sure in restaurants, you know, in any business, there comes a point when you say, okay, I gotta like, all right, we gotta really start doing this, you know,
Well,
and then you get like a line of credit from the bank, and you're like, oh wow, okay, so now I'm on the hook for this, and so let's see.
I'm just not ashamed of talking about it. I think that's kind of where I've landed because I was in that place when I was the hungriest, most ambitious culinary school student. And I was looking this decision in the face of like, do you stay on and do your bachelor's to get the business savvy? Or do you go off and do this gallivanting around the world to work at three Michelin star places? And semi similar to what you chose. Like, I mean, I can't go to school for Michelin food. You just kind of have to start working. And so I chose the art route versus the business route. And I found that I had to kind of like do a little bit of catch up once I started to kind of get into my later 20s where I was like, okay, I'm significantly lacking in these skills. But I found that it was like I can learn these in different places. It doesn't have to be at an institutionalized school environment. So that really helped me. And that's why I was curious where you started in this place and you changed.
I think it was the right way to go. I think business you can pick up and you can learn along the way. Do I know anything about derivatives or I don't know, like,
Sure.
stuff like, no, not really, but kind of the basic foundational stuff. Do I need to go get an MBA? Is that gonna like, no, I need to invest in our business and improving. Did you end
You
up going that route? Did you end up going to school? No, you
No, I
it
finished
didn't
my
sound like it.
associate's degree and then I just went out into the world and started working. And it was only once I
Yeah,
got a management position where it was realistic for me to kind of like start to sit in the finance meetings and start to, I actually had HR conversations that I would have on the day to day. And so that
yeah,
was kind of the pivotal shift in me starting to think about, kind of putting the knife and the pots and pans down and starting to kind of like sit in front of a computer monitor and work on spreadsheets and stuff like that. And truly, it's like I really fell in love with it. I went through a bit of a rough patch where I would like really pushed back on it, and I really felt like an immense sense of it was getting stripped from me, and I wasn't getting a chance to cook on the day to day anymore, and that really it was hard. It was hard for me to kind of deal with that. I often tell the anecdote of the I got the knife taken out of my hand and someone handed me a clipboard, and that's how it felt. But now I love it. Like setting up systems, like diving into numbers, projecting how things are going to work, what we want to launch, like all those sorts of things have completely changed for me because I learned that it felt like starting at zero again when I went from because I felt so apt at cooking. I felt
mm,
so comfortable there, and doing anything business related was really hard for me. So I grappled with it, but yeah, I like to ask because certain tools that people will sometimes use to fill those gaps can help other people as they're kind of progressing through their career.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think yeah, putting together a budget and cash flow and all those things, yeah, have just been like they're kind of like my uncle calls it anxiety busters. Like you know, it's good to see kind of what the future might look like, and what's the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, and where's in the middle, and yeah, it can really help you predict what you can and can't do. I mean, it's a powerful tool.
This is potentially a vulnerable question, and you can kind of let me know where your head goes on this. But I said it in my voiceover of the this place called French Laundry video when I had the opportunity to have your wine as part of the pairing. And I said something to the effect of, and this wine is from the winemaker who used to work at Screaming Eagle. And I said that because when the server, I can't remember if it was a server or Som, brought that wine over, and they showed us the bottle, and that was the kind of like 2 sentence liner that they
Hmm.
shared as they were presenting the bottle. And when I moved to Seattle and I started doing pop up dinners, I would have food critics and Instagram influencers and whatever come to my dinners, and then they would ask me about my work experience. And then I would say I worked at French Laundry, or I worked at Grace, or I worked in Scandinavia, or whatever. And it was always this kind of like two-liner about Justin from French Laundry is doing food. And I'm curious, that really irked me. Like I always wanted to kind of like shed that, and I wanted to just kind of like stand alone as my own person. So when you hear that, or kind of like, is that something that you take with a little bit of pride of like, my experience at Screaming Eagle makes me the winemaker that I am today? Or is it something where, and quite honestly, for me, I think there was a little bit of like ego wrestling that I was doing. And as I think about Justin, when I moved here and I was like, don't talk about French Laundry, don't talk about French Laundry, talk about me. I think there's a
Mhm.
little bit of ego there, but I'm curious, how do you deal with that kind of like reputation plus social proof plus signaling plus like there's so many things that happen when people talk about you or your work in that way. So
Totally.
I'd really love to know how you approach that.
Yeah, I don't really, I've always, I guess I don't know if I'm embarrassed about it, but I've never wanted it to like, always wanted to prove myself outside of that, that world. So out of that winery in particular. So it was something that I never really touted or put forward. Yeah, it kind of makes me cringe a little bit, when somebody says it. I know like my buddy went to Harvard and when, he drops the H bomb when, he says, oh, I went to Harvard. It's kind of similar.
Yep.
But yeah, I've always wanted to prove my worth outside of the winery. And like, I wanted to like say, well, Massimo can make really great wine outside of that, that winery. And that was something I really wanted to prove to myself. It wasn't Screaming Eagle that made me great. It was, Massimo can do this outside of that. French Laundry alum, Screaming Eagle alum, you hear that a lot. And it's a nice club to be in for sure. I'm not mad, but there was something to prove for sure.
Well, that was going to be kind of my next question because I, looking back at again past Justin, I didn't set the parameters of like at what point will you be able to confidently say that you have proven yourself or you have broken past beyond just being a French Laundry alum? Like, is it when all of a sudden articles that write about you or your work don't mention French Laundry at all? Like, is that the metric of success? Like, how are we? What
Right.
stick are we using to measure this feeling of inadequacy that you're feeling? And at what point is that going to kind of like go away? Do you have something like that for yourself, or is it something that you just think if I continue down this path, it is inevitable that I will get to that place where all of a sudden that ends up happening? Or do you just not think about it anymore?
I just think that hopefully just Di Costanzo overtakes that,
Yep.
and then it's just like, oh yeah, it's Massimo Di Costanzo. Oh yeah, he makes those great wines, Di Costanzo. Oh, they age great. Like they're of a particular style. Like, oh, like you'll really love them. Oh, they're great people. Like that's what and then also like maybe, it's like not rocking the business card anymore. Like maybe that's like a
Right.
sign of like, okay, like maybe you're starting to like get some traction.
I think that there's a balance to be found between forming your own identity, like you're saying, and when you don't have an identity yet, and I wish I would have done this, is like use that resume, alum title, whatever you want to call it, as a tool. Like I
Yeah.
wish I would have just like completely hammered it home to like make it almost like a meme of like I'm the French Laundry guy. Like or and like not to the point where I was actually like artificially inflating it, but I wish I would have leaned into it more because when
Sure.
you don't have an identity yet, like it gets your foot in the door. Like I had a business partner who would say the anecdote of it gives people something to hang their hat on. And I think that that's something that like I wish I would. I'm upset that I felt that insecurity where I was like, no, don't talk about French Laundry or any of the places that I worked at because it was yeah. And again, I don't mean to turn this into a therapy session, but I see similar. Like I wanted to get your thoughts on it because it is
Yeah.
clearly something that you think about as well.
Yeah. I could have rocked it harder for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I did not, and then there was this like wine is weird because, while I'm like, for a few years, like I'm making this wine behind the scene that no one really knows about. And people are like, what's Massimo doing? Where's he at? Like, does he even have a job? Like, ethically, I feel like better about it, maybe. Everyone's different in the way, I'm not really a salesman kind of person. So I'm kind of the back of the house kind of guy.
Right, right. Which is a lot of the people listening fall into that camp too. And so it's kind of a good segue into another question I had, and this is similarly to the young winemaker, the som, the maybe chef who wants to kind of foray into wine maybe later in their career, and they're looking at what you guys do, and they're like, "This looks amazing. I want to do that someday." And I'm not looking for any sort of dissuasion here, but I just want you to be real with me. What do most people get wrong about owning a winery?
Oh boy, how cash intensive it is. You know how much patience that you need. Though it's kind of this vicious cycle of Mother Nature. Like with beer, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to brew, this month, but like every year, you have this cycle, and then you have inventory, and is that inventory backing up? And fortunately, we haven't been in that scenario. But that is a common thing that happens. I self-funded this.
Well, you
Is
you
that
said cash is cash flow. Like, what is it like? You weren't expecting labor to be so high. You weren't expecting the infrastructure of equipment to be so high. You weren't expecting storage to cost so much. Like, what?
all the above? I mean,
All of
great
it.
pricing. In
Yeah.
Napa, like
Yep.
great pricing.
Yep.
That's huge. It just continually goes up. Production space. I was able to start because I could kind of trade services to make my wine. So I got a good head start. But if I were going to do it again at this age, I'd probably look to investors. Unless I had already a business that was, that could pay for it. But it's a great industry, and I don't want to just say the tough parts, but it's a great industry in a lot of ways. But I think and then also one of the hardest parts is, how do you stand out? How do you stand out? How do you become one of the cool kids, or how do you stand out in a crowded field? What's that vision? I think I had a pretty good vision of pretty good, like, I thought there was a niche for these kind of wines. Fortunately, it's been nice to see that people enjoy them.
I also had a question on my list, which you segued perfectly to, which was, as you guys are thinking about brand building, whether it's even at the start, and you can take this as a snapshot moment where you're going to give your answer from, or even like last week as you guys are building this brand over time, what do you guys discuss in those strategy meetings? Like, how do those typically flow? Like, does a lot of that just like reiterate the vision, and we need to just continue to push towards that North Star? Or like, how, or maybe you can talk about how that strategy has changed over time. I thought that the brand was going to be like this, and then we put it out there, and then all of a sudden it transformed into something completely different. How do you guys think about strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Strategically, we just try to stay as focused as possible on I think what we're doing, and fine tuning that, and maintaining, because we don't own vineyard, so that's another tough thing. Is that, I mean, it can be there's pros and cons to that. So maintaining quality fruit sources. One of the biggest things is now with climate change and fires, how do we, the part that's been a lot of strategy conversation is, well, maybe we need strategic inventory that we hold back. You kind of build that library that you have to kind of weather some storms. In Burgundy, you have hail and frost, and some years you might only have several barrels of wine, but you lean on those back vintages to maybe smooth things out a little bit. So those are things that we never really thought about before.
You mentioned that you identified that there was a niche that the wine that you wanted to make could potentially either fit into, however you want to describe that. Was that I mean, in a lot of sense, was that a prediction, or you did the research to kind of like see? Because was it a case of like you ended up creating a category, or did you identify there was a category or type of style that the shelves or the portfolio of what makers that restaurants carry were missing, and you were like, oh, this is and was that a correct prediction, or did you end up kind of having to adjust once the
Did I
market
screw
gave you
it?
some feedback?
Did I screw that one up?
No, no.
No, what I the niche already existed,
Yeah,
and it was basically like producers that I really admired, and I could kind of count them on, two hands. And I said, wow, I could become one of those producers, in a field of 800, and maybe, and it wasn't just like, oh, I could stand out more. It was the fact that I really like those wines and I want to make those wines. How, and there's not tons of people doing that. How can I, how can I be in that group? Because they were Napa wines that I gravitated towards. What gave me the confidence, I'll say, was Screaming Eagle. Screaming Eagle gave me the confidence because it was one of those wines. Regardless of the price, stylistically, it was one of those wines. And I said, wow, if not that I was like, oh, I can make the next Screaming Eagle. That was never on my agenda. But it was like, wow, stylistically, these wines are very coveted, and I can make this style that I'm grouping these wineries into in that same vein and still maybe have success. So I can kind of make the wines that I believe in. And I don't want to say that's a slippery slope, but stylistically, I can make the wines that I want to make. And there could be a channel, there could be channel is a lame word. There could be an audience for these wines.
You touched on production and how you guys think about going from year to year. And you also mentioned those first two in '08 and '09, those didn't even ever end up getting, put out on the De Costanzo label. When you look at production now, you have like quality, quantity, and if you really push for, like you're talking about, perfection, 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 the quantity might be zero because like you're never going to
Yeah,
achieve whatever this arbitrary perfection is. But then simultaneously, if you go for quantity, 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 the quality in most cases has to go down.
it's
So
going
how
to
do you
suffer.
guys balance that where it's like you need to put something out there, but it needs to be to a certain quality level? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, we're kind of finding that out. I mean, I think right now it's kind of at a level where I can do the work. Once we get past that, then it's okay. We need to bring somebody in to help. I do all the physical work, and but maybe like, hey, okay, maybe we need to go to a different facility where there can be some more service to help with production, and then that could make it easier to grow and still, I think, retain quality, because we're pretty small. We make about 1,500 cases. So, but I'm 42. Okay, like pre-arthritis in the knees, and maybe Massimo needs a little help. I'm starting to think about those things where before, it's a lot to juggle.
I have this question I'd like to ask folks who are kind of at the top of their game, and I call it the meta job interview question. And unfortunately, Facebook changed their name, so now everybody just thinks that
I
that's
know.
what I'm talking about, but it's not. So I can distinctly
Sure.
remember when I was starting to try to apply for jobs out of culinary school, I had a cook at a place I was staging at kind of pull me aside and tell me, hey, you're going to sit down with chef at the end of this whole thing. Don't tell them anything about wanting a TV show because that's immediately just going to be a red flag and like you're not going to get hired here.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you see in either, again, young winemakers or anything that's like someone's just butting into this where you're like, yeah, that it's cool that you think like that, but this is not correct
Well, I
in
think,
your opinion.
yeah, I think it's good advice to kind of, I mean, to slow your roll a little bit. I think everyone needs to have dreams, but just say, hey, like, wine is slow. It's patient, it's a patient person's game. All those things I would, you know, give as advice. Um, and you're hungry and you want the world, and you might get it, but just know it's gonna maybe take a little bit longer than you're expecting, and be ready for that, and be ready to learn and get your hands dirty.
As we start to wrap up here, I have a couple rapid fire questions for you. They don't have to be rapid fire answers.
Okay.
Is there a book that's been particularly impactful in your career?
It's probably more like cooking cookbooks.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
cookbooks have honestly like not less so wine books. I mean, there's I do like Kermit Lynch's book on the wine road. I think that it's very romantic. I don't know, like Jacques Pepin and like those dudes. Like that dude's super cool. I love that, the art of living and food and wine being a whole part of that. And that's what I'm really interested in is like just living, yeah, living at that, I don't want to say at a higher level, but like just enjoying the pleasures of life, and that being, food and wine and community and people. But yeah, I love cooking and thinking about ingredients. Bring this back to the fatted calf. Like searching out ingredients and like meeting the people behind those ingredients, I think is super cool. And that is what inspires me. And it also inspires my winemaking, like Italian food. It's very ingredient driven. And that's how I look at my winemaking as very ingredient driven and less, there is technique, but I really want the ingredients to, the raw material to kind of shine through.
I mean, I think that was one of the coolest parts about you coming in as a customer to Fatted Calf is that like, man, and Ryan, who is my boss, Ryan Harris, shout out to Ryan, would always say like Massimo's going to take this crepinette and he's going to go and drink it with the and eat it with the most incredible wine that he made himself, like, and just the you crack the nut, man. Like you have just the lifestyle and the combination of your interests with your work, and happy to jam on that. Take a break from rapid fire questions for a second, because is everything else just gravy because you have been able to achieve this lifestyle for yourself?
It's pretty gravy, man. I mean, it's hard. No, dude, I'll be
Yeah.
honest. Like it's hard. Like this, like there's a lot of pressure. I feel the pressure, I think mostly to come through. I to like make really great wine every time. And yeah, when you get to like decant that bottle and like yeah, like cook up some crepinettes and or like some really nice prosciutto, and it's also finding pleasures in the simple things,
Right.
which I think can get lost a lot.
Because like, are
Which
you
which
into other things? Do you like watches? Do you like cars? Do you like cigar?
I
Like,
don't. There was no, no. I don't collect a lot. Like my brother, he collects a lot of things,
yeah.
watches and tools, and I mean, I like food and wine. I like yeah, I guess I like, my dad was an antique restorer. He restored antique furniture. So I like going to the flea market and kind of like searching out, like finding cool, well-made things. Yeah, I like that kind of stuff. And then time with the kids. But yeah, but I do all the cooking at the house, and yeah, I derive a lot of pleasure from that.
Okay, we'll go. I'm diving back in.
Okay.
Other cookbooks. You said Jacques Pepin. Any other cookbooks that stand out or that have been kind of like, I changed how I cooked after I read this book, or this gave me a lot of insight?
I like the like Giorgio Locatelli. I think his book is really good. I like it's like The Joy of Cooking for Italy. It's um, Artusi.
Yep.
And then I have some like printed pamphlets that I found in a bookstore in Florence. Um, those are, yeah, I kind of cherish those, and that's something I learned from my grandparents in Italy. That's how they cooked. So, and then my dad, obviously my dad brought that to the table. So my father's Italian, my mother's American. She met him there and brought him back. So I grew up in a very like Italian home in Berkeley,
Wild.
and Southern Italian home. He's from Positano, so green vegetables and drenched in olive oil and fish and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we'd be, for Christmas it'd be cannelloni and lamb and anyways. But so it was kind of an interesting childhood in that sense. My house was different than like the other kids, my other friends. But it was cool. It was like being kind of like being in Italy.
I asked this question to chefs, but I will pivot it to be more of a winemaker related question for you. And the question is there a technique you're still intimidated by? And for chefs, I say in the kitchen. And for chefs, they'll sometimes say butchery or making souffle or whatever. Is there something in winemaking where you're like, I wouldn't really touch that, or I still don't know how to do that, or that
Yeah,
kind of makes me nervous.
most winemakers would say bottling. That's like kind of the answer
Why?
because there's so many little components to it and machines and things that can go wrong, and it's like so that's usually why there's you have a technician come in who's specialized. Um,
I didn't know that.
and then for me, yeah, I've been thinking more about filtration and filtering my wines, which I haven't really been doing, and that's something that is a little bit intimidating, and it's actually intimidating me right now.
Why? What
So it's a
makes it
very pertinent
intimidating?
question. Well, it's just kind of like the unknown. It's like it's you have to learn something. You have to learn something, and it's you don't want to mess up your wine, and but it's also supposed it can enhance it. It's been really hard to ship wine. The windows of shipping wine have become more and more challenging because it's just like it's either like cold and then it's hot. It's like there's no like so filtration, it will help stabilize the wine. It's kind of a philosophical question too that I've been wrestling with. And it kind of comes back to cheese a little
Yeah, yeah,
bit. It's like how much applause do you want? How strong do
right,
you want the applause to be?
right.
Like is there somewhere in between that is like the sweet spot? You know, so it's funny that you mentioned the cheese
So,
because it kind of comes back to that a little bit.
so you're gonna make this decision to filter. How
Yeah.
do you do that? Like, do you try it on a small amount, or do you
Mhm.
just say this? We're gonna commit to this decision. Everything this year is going to be filtered, and we're gonna just see if it works or if it's not. Like, how do you
It's,
approach that?
yeah, I'm trying it on one wine because in 2020 we only made one wine because of the smoke. And I was like, you know what? This is the year to try it. I mean, I don't make this decision lightly. I've done a lot of research and tasting, and a lot of times it can make the wine better. So where I've always felt like it's kind of it takes away, but it can actually enhance a wine. So that's what I'm really curious about, and that's how I'm trying to keep that learner's kind of mentality, the student's mentality, because you can kind of get caught up in your beliefs and your ideals, and so how do you take a step back and say, well, wait a second, like, has this really been the way that has this been the right way? Or maybe is this path, maybe it's shades of gray, I don't know, but it's has definitely made me question what I've been doing the last 15 years. Not in a bad way, but just makes me just like say, oh well, wow, this method could maybe what I've been believing has not necessarily been true. So it's a kind of a cool opportunity and kind of a cool trial. I'm sure there's a lot of winemakers who have, who struggle with those kind of questions. I'm sure a chef has struggled with.
Well, it's hard to admit that you have spent all this time and all this energy and all these, you've sacrificed so much in service of this thing that we wrap as part of our identity as like, I am a chef, I am a winemaker, I'm a whatever.
Yeah.
And it's to just kind of tease out the fact that like guest after guest after guest that come on the show, regardless of how much experience they have, regardless of if they wrote a cookbook or they were on TV or they have this many stars or they have this many employees at their business, like we all have things that we're still intimidated by. And
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, like, I would be, quite frankly, maybe even a little bit disappointed if someone came on the show and is like, nope, I know everything, you know? It's like, get that out of your head that you're ever going to get to that place because it just doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist for sure, man. And yeah, sometimes I feel like, oh, other people know it all, but like, but it's not true. It's a healthy way to live. It's been interesting questioning the process a little bit, and but it's kind of been cool. It's been cool to question the process because that's how you get better, you know.
The next one is I call it like it's a Saturday morning. Your first day off and you kind of lumber into your kitchen and you're going to make eggs for yourself. How do you make those eggs?
First Saturday off in a while. I'd probably do like a slow cooked style with a good hunk of butter. Yeah, if I had some creme fraiche, I'd probably toss that in there too.
So like a soft scramble kind of thing.
Kind of like a super slow soft scramble. I'm not upset about a good fried egg either, but I make those on Fridays for my son. We fried egg Friday.
Love it.
So if it was a Saturday, I would do the low and slow.
Is there an ingredient that you're obsessed with right now?
I've been way into anchovies and like can't get enough of anchovy. It's a very one, it's umami, but then it's like comfort and it reminds me of Italy. So for me, it's been very transportative.
Do your kids get down with the anchovies?
They don't get as excited as their dad does.
Womp.
Not
Someday.
yet,
Someday.
but they will for sure.
Yeah.
One of them barely eats anything green, and the other one is quite. Will try almost everything.
Last two questions for you. You
Sure.
somehow get a call right after this conversation that you just won an all expenses paid trip to eat at your dream restaurant. And when you get there, there's someone you've always wanted to talk to, waiting to have dinner with you. What is that restaurant and who is that person?
Boy. Can I look up the restaurant real quick?
Please.
It's where my cousin works. Oh, it's Da Vittorio in Bergamo, and he's one of the chefs there. So I'd like to eat there, and who would I like to dine with? So just me. It's just me, and it's kind of one-on-one.
You and a person. And the other
Yeah,
caveat I like to add that makes this interesting is they can be living or dead.
Man, I go with Barack. I go with Obama. I would just want to hang out with that dude. I've always wanted to send him a bottle of wine to say, thanks. So it'd probably be, Obama.
Is there anything specific you would ask him, or just to be in his presence would be
enough? I think just being in his presence and, to be the first Black president of the United States of America.
Insane.
Like, what was that really like? If I could kind of get the inside scoop on that. I mean, so I think it'd be cool to kick it with Obama.
You can answer this last question from the perspective of a winemaker or a winery owner or someone in wine. Or if you have something that specifically comes to mind for chefs, you can phrase this in that context as well. But the question I normally try to end people with is, what do you think chefs can be doing better to help the next generation? And you can swap chefs with winemaker if you want.
Yeah, I think winemakers, I think it's an inclusivity thing for sure. You see a lot more women winemakers these days, which is like awesome. Um, and I think we need more people of color. It's been a pretty homogeneous business, and I think it would make it a terribly more exciting field. But yeah, I think that is inclusivity and having different perspectives and be more fun.
I mean, is there an action item that potentially stands out to you as like such a I mean, pardon the pun, but like a low hanging fruit that someone who is
Hmm.
operating that could potentially make who's listening to this like this week, you can make this call to kind of move to nudge themselves in that direction or kind of like make more opportunities available or whatever comes to mind
Yeah,
for
I
you.
think yeah, I think making opportunities available, getting the word out in the right channels. If we offered intern, we would be very receptive and wanting to talk to as many candidates as possible.
Massimo, is there anything that we didn't get a chance to touch on or something that we maybe did touch on that you wanted to dive a little bit into more? Or do you have questions for me or any asks of the audience?
Sometimes people ask me like, you know, what are those wine moments in my life, that have kind of left an impression on me, and I think for me it's not just like the high end wine that has left an impression on me. It's like it's like the restaurant wine, the Vino da Tavola that you get in Italy, at the restaurant, the house wine. I think those wines have as much place as like Napa Valley Cabernet. I think they can bring as much joy, um, and like the culture of wine. That's part of the culture of wine, and even just drink and wine as a beverage. There's wine as like this art form, but there's also wine as a beverage, and like putting it in a tumbler or putting it over, put some wine in ice and summer peaches. That was like, I don't want wine to feel so stuffy. And I guess maybe we make stuffy wines because we make Cabernet, but um, wine can be playful and a part of everyday life as well. So I just want to like throw that out there because it doesn't all have to be, the high end experience.
It's so huge because you have to do a certain amount of saying no for Di Costanzo wines to be successful. You can't be everything to everybody. But you, as the human, Massimo, can also enjoy. I mean, I think that's why like Ugly Delicious with David Chang did so well because everybody
Mm.
thought that David Chang was like this, high end chef who had all these restaurants. But then you see him like walking around eating Domino's in a Netflix show, and you're like, oh, okay, like this makes it this is interesting.
He
Uh,
gets down like I get down.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, like there's something there to giving your business a certain identity, but then
Yeah,
also wanting to be an advocate for just like more people to get involved in your kind of like sphere, which is enjoying wine and food together and
yeah,
all the things that come with that.
totally. And it's yeah, I feel yeah, I pinch myself to be able to do what I do, and that people enjoy you know the work that me and my wife do. It's I have to give a big shout out to my wife because she does so much, Erin, and I couldn't do it without her support.
Shout out to Aaron.
Big shout out.
Where do you want people to go if they potentially have a either a question for you or they want to check out the wines or they want to read more about your work? Where should people go?
You can hit me up on my beeper if you want, or no, I'm dating myself here. No, mdcwines.com. That's our website. Info at mdcwines. That's a direct connect to myself or Aaron. Comes to both of us, so we'll see that. Please, yeah, reach out with any questions. And then, of course, we're on Instagram. We try to give a an honest representation of who we are and what we do.
Thanks so much again for taking the time. It was a joy to connect again after all these years. And again, just thanks again.
Thank you, Justin. This has been fantastic and really thought-provoking. I appreciate it.
Massimo is one of the warmest hearted, knows how to live type of people that I've ever had the pleasure of coming across in I'm going to call it my entire career. He's just such a passionate person to speak with. And I just think he's really found the combination of work and lifestyle that a lot of us are sometimes told just doesn't exist, and he's somehow found a way to crack that nut, and it was really a joy to get to talk to him. Friendly reminder that if you do want to support the show, you can check out and shop Corin.com with any of the links down low in the description of this podcast. And that does help out the content because Corin is a channel partner. And those are affiliate links where you don't have to pay anything extra and we end up getting to earn, which is really, really great. And so shout out to all of you who have been shopping like that because it truly, truly does help. If you want to subscribe and make sure that you get this podcast out to more folks that need to see this, Apple Podcasts and Spotify allow you to do ratings now. So Spotify didn't always let you do this, but it would be a real help to everything that we're trying to build as more and more people use Spotify as their podcast player to leave a rating on Spotify. I'm going to be in the future, I think in the next couple weeks or so, doing some shout outs to folks who leave reviews on Spotify. And so especially if you end up doing that, if you want to go ahead and screenshot that you've left a 5-star review, shoot it to me in an Instagram story, and I'm going to share all the people who end up doing that because, again, it really, really does help out the show. There's a reason that podcasters ask you to leave ratings on shows because it helps. And so thank you if you've done so already. And if you're planning on doing it, thanks in advance. Well, here we are together again at the end of another episode of the Repertoire Podcast. If this is your first time listening, this is a show for hospitality creators who want to think better, increase their performance, and believe that it's possible to take lessons from what others have already learned. I am your host, Justin Khanna, and if you're new here, I'd like to personally welcome you to the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Friendly heads up to check out the show notes inside of the description of this podcast if you want to check out previous guests, links to specifics that got brought up in this episode, as well as other helpful content that we create and share here online because everything we do is focused on helping you along your journey. If you don't have a ton of time, the best place to start is with some value sent straight to your inbox every single week. It's called the Repertoire Newsletter, where we share knowledge on sharpening your skills, asymmetric upside, and exploring the industry beyond the status quo. If you subscribe, we'll keep you up to date on trends that are shaping the hospitality creator ecosystem. We'll share discounts on gear that we find, as well as content that we've been producing ourselves and helpful articles that we've already read and decided are worth your time. Last up, if you want to connect with other industry professionals in the Repertoire Pro community, you want to check out courses like Total Station Domination or download free tools that we've created, you can learn more at joinrepertoire.com. That's JOINREPERTOIRE.com. The only ask from me is that if you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a review of this show on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify to help the podcast universe know that people like us like shows like this. Regardless, I'll see you in the next episode. My name is Justin Khanna, and I hope you have a good one.